Skullthorp Moor near Fakenham in Norfolk is dedicated to my favourite birds, hawks and owls. For the rare and beautiful marsh harrier, this place is a vital sanctuary.
Sacred spots with their vulnerable species, places where people can be educated, can be taken for granted. But it hasn't always been like this. You know, one of the reasons I think times have changed is what you're doing. You're watching some wildlife TV, and wildlife TV has perhaps inspired people to look after all of this stuff.
The man who founded Skullthorp Moor Reserve is a personal hero of mine. He was a pioneer of nature filmmaking. In the 1970s, he was one of the first to challenge the destruction of the countryside with his film Vanishing Hedgerows.
I'd made a lot of films for the Midland Bank on how farmers could farm intensively and make a lot of money. One particular farmer at just outside Huntingdon used to employ 22 people. He sacked them all. He had cash crops. He got rid of everything, just concentrated on cereals and cattle. And of course he bulldozed a lot of hedges, filled in ponds, knocked down barns. And I thought, this is not right. Somehow, and that was the germ of the idea of Vanishing Hedgerows.
I was only a child at the time, and yet Vanishing Hedgerows was quite a controversial film of its time, wasn't it?
Yes, because it did poke a stick at farmers, saying, you know, what we're doing, removing hedgerows, which are the kind of roadways for wildlife, is very detrimental and not doing any good at all. Old-fashioned farming was being bulldozed, I would say, into the 20th century.
We had horses when we started here, and I did a little bit of ploughing sometimes.
Filming at Stiffkey in North Norfolk, David Cobham used an account of farming during the war years by the author Henry Williamson. It lamented how modern methods were radically altering the countryside.
It was all about his experiences at Stiffkey farming between 1936 and 46, when you saw everything come in, really. The first use of tractors, little grey dicker he called it, and first sprays too.
The mixture of DNC and sulphate of ammonia, spraying.
I think it was the first conservation film that the BBC had done, and they were a bit terrified of it and the impact it would have on farmers.
And what did the farmers make of it then?
They weren't very pleased.
David Cobham's next film was to show viewers nature in a way that we now take for granted.
You know, Vanishing Hedgerows was such a successful film that it encouraged David Cobham to make another about one of his favourite species. Only it was a species that required some real technical difficulties to be overcome. Indeed, people said it simply couldn't be done.
His project? This nocturnal bird, before the technology to film it had even been developed.
I knew about this lovely guy, Dr. Roger Payne, who'd done a lot of work on how barn owls can catch prey in absolute darkness, and so that was a big challenge. I'd seen the army using handheld night vision devices, and so I got the BBC to get hold of one of these, and once I got it and could see how it would work, I knew we could actually do the difficult bit, which was filming the barn owl in absolute darkness.
Filming in total darkness with a special camera shows that an owl's hearing is so sensitive that it can catch a mouse relying solely on the rustles and squeaks. Even in total darkness, guided solely by sound, the owl homes in unerringly to make its kill.
We had to have a whole lot of tame owls to do it with, and there was one particular one, which they're all colour ringed. There was one called Blue, I think, which did all the catching of mice in darkness.
The film inspired a 13-year-old lad, and yes, that's me in the picture. I wrote to David wanting to help. My biology teacher and I then reared some of the owls from the film and released them back into the wild. David Cobham's next film was the cinema feature of Henry Williamson's famous story of a wild otter's peril, hunted to death by hounds.
Tarka the Otter.
Tarka came out of a conversation when we were doing the last day's filming on Vanishing Hedgerows, and Henry said to me, "David, have you ever thought of doing Tarka, making a film out of it?" And I said, "Well, I haven't really ever." He said, "Well, Disney have always wanted to do it, and they offered me a derisory sum of £300 to do it. If you can come up with something better, you know, we can talk and see if we can come up with a good script. But he said, you must be absolutely true to the book. It's a real documentary, if you like, about one particular otter and what an otter has to go through. You had to have trained animals to do all this stuff, and finding an otter that would do everything that was necessary was very, very difficult. And we got this little otter called Spade, and he was absolutely wonderful. He just followed us like a dog. But he would only work for about a couple of hours, and then he had to come and sit in your lap and dry off in your sweater, which made you feel very good, very wet. And then he would work again. But he was absolutely brilliant. It had its premiere at the Rialto in Leicester Square, and we had the otter there, and crowds of children came afterwards and wanted to talk and stroke the otter. Bit dangerous, I thought. And there was one girl left there at the end, and she came up very shyly and said, I'm very upset, it made me cry. And I said, you should never be ashamed of crying. It's a wonderful thing. If it made you cry, the film has worked, because that's what it's meant to do at the end.
When you were filming Tarka, there was a terribly sad coincidence, wasn't there?
It was a beautiful day, and we filmed, you know, the three bubbles and the Deadlock, the hound, being brought out because it had this fight to the death. And filmed until the sun went off the hills and came away. And then, that was a Friday, and then on the Saturday, Richard Williamson, Henry's son, was there, and he came over to me and he extended his hand to me and shook my hand and said, David, I think you ought to know that while you were filming the death of Tarka yesterday, Henry died. And that was very spooky.
After a long career making conservation films, David Cobham is now dedicated to conserving wild places, which led him to protect Skullthorp Moor, home of the marsh harrier.
What a fantastic place, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's 40 acres. Having cleared the reed bed and got it functioning properly, water, sunlight and greenery supports the dragonflies, all the other insects, the small birds, water rails, moorhens, and with the marsh harrier right at the top. If that wasn't all right, there would be no marsh harriers.
The battle to convince people of the importance of the natural world is sadly not yet over.
How are we going to win this one, do you think?
I think it's education, myself. I think we've got to educate everyone, and I don't mean just farmers, that biodiversity is absolutely crucial to the countryside.
David Cobham's work has certainly influenced me, both as a filmmaker and now as a passionate educator. It's a great honour to know a man who's so committed to conservation.